Now we are heading on to a panel that is beginning to tell us that there is a lot of attention.
Those eventually need to see you. So I was saying this ago. Next question.
Okay. So we have a panel that is already giving us the indication that a lot of attention is being given to indigenous spiritualities. So this panel is titled The Role of Indigenous Spirituality in the Work of Catholic Religious Sisters in Asia. And we have a very broad distribution of the speakers. We have Sister Ngoc Nguyen from Marquette University, Brian from Mother Teresa Institute, and we have Joe Evans from Villanova University. So the first presenter here is Sister Ngoc, and she is going to be talking to us on a paper titled The Role of Indigenous Spirituality in the Work of Religious Sisters in Asia. Sister Ngoc.
So the topic I will present today is the influence of Vietnamese indigenous spiritualities on the Vietnamese Catholic Church. So when I was a little child, I was eager to celebrate the Lunar New Year because it was an occasion when parents or the relatives would give us the lucky money. So Sister Nguyen have experience about that. So when we visit the house of the relatives to wish them a good and successful year. So New Year's were also when the parents brought us the new clothes. So today my celebration of the Lunar New Year has more significance as a time of reunion between heaven and earth, and between the dead and the living, and also between all human beings. It is a time of sharing with others and with the poor. So our sisters, the Lover of the Holy Cross, cooperate with the Caritas group in the diocese to share the gifts of the New Year with the poor. We show the poor that they are included in the joy of all Vietnamese. Through the love of God, giving and reunion bring us a deep, meaningful, and beautiful Lunar New Year. There was a time, however, when the celebration would not have been allowed for Catholics because it was a Confucian practice introduced by the Chinese. Like most Asian countries, Catholics are a minority in Vietnam. European missionaries introduced Catholicism to Southeast Asia in the 15th century. The influence of Confucianism, Buddhism, and other indigenous religions continue to affect the interpretation, practice, rituals for the Vietnamese Catholics. This includes the Sister of the Lover of the Holy Cross, a Vietnamese congregation founded by the French missionary in the 17th century. As such, indigenous spiritualities continue to impact how the Lover of the Holy Cross sisters and wider Vietnamese church understand and practice their faith. I examine how Vietnamese Catholics in general and the Lover of the Holy Cross sisters specifically continue to be influenced by indigenous spiritualities in their work and in their faith lives. After providing context for Vietnamese religiosities and spiritual practices, I examine how this has influenced the Catholic Church through inculturation and societal norms. I then analyze the impact of this influence and how it manifests through rituals, prayer, and the Vietnamese Catholic image of God. Vietnamese indigenous practices both predate Confucianism, Buddhism, and Catholicism as folk religions. Yet religiosity features a blending of the practice and beliefs of various religious traditions. Ancestor worship remains a core aspect of indigenous influence in Vietnam. Because the importance of filial piety, Vietnamese people believe that everything has its own spirit, leading to a worship of nature spirits who have to protect the land. Other forms of indigenous practice include rituals, which express gratitude and honor to village heroes who contribute to protect the village or reinforce communal solidarities. Village guardians veneration promotes the imitation of heroes to live a good and moral life and continue to build a loving and supportive and just village. Vietnamese indigenous religiosity is evident in family celebration and spiritual life related to ancestor veneration and special holidays or anniversaries. Every Vietnamese family has an ancestor altar with the photos of deceased family members, like you see it from the picture over there. So they put the incense, the flowers, the candles. These altars become the centers of family devotions for death anniversaries, Lunar New Year's, and other important family events like the weddings. So worship of the Mother Goddess is another distinct indigenous religion tradition because of the significant roles of mothers for fertility and nurturing. This manifests in the veneration of female deities such as Mother Waters, Mother Earth, Mother Mountains, or as we will see for Catholics with our Blessed Mother. Venerating the Mother Goddess is expected to result in blessing for health, fertility, and prosperities. So the first Christian missionaries, Dominicans, and Franciscans arrived in Vietnam in the 16th centuries, but their efforts had insignificant results. It was not until the 17th century that evangelization in Vietnam began to have success. This was due to Jesuit missionaries who reinforced, established, and nurtured the Vietnamese church. Before the arrival of Christianity, most Vietnamese people followed Confucianism, Buddhism, or Taoism, who all emphasize the reverence of ancestors. Catholicism was criticized by the Vietnamese government for its lack of filial devotion to parents and ancestors. This perceived neglect of familial responsibilities is one reason why the government began to persecute Catholics. So you can see this picture. It indicates that the government tried to kill the Vietnamese Christians. So the reason the government want to persecute the Catholic Christians in Vietnam is have include the reason of the ancestor worship, and then also it also include the political factors also. So Western missionaries in Vietnam during the 16th and 17th centuries rejected ancestor worship as a form of idolatry. Eventually, the Catholic hierarchies began to inculturate some of these indigenous practices into Catholic practice, allowing for these rituals of filial piety, influenced by the cultural practice of ancestral veneration. Vietnamese Catholics maintain an ancestor altars in their homes. However, the ancestor must be placed lower than God's altars. Likewise, Vietnamese Christians pray for the dead at home or ask the priest to offer mass to pray on the death anniversaries. These rituals express belief in the communion between the living and the dead, corresponding to the Christian tradition of venerating the saints. Although Vietnamese Christians do not venerate nature spirits, they are encouraged to protect and care for creatures as God's creations. Other Catholic rituals have also adapted some aspects of indigenous spiritualities. For instance, the Vietnamese Christians will practice a praying for the deceased at 49 days, 100 days, 1 year, or 3 years. So likewise, the devotion to Mary in Vietnamese Catholicism is truly a case study in inculturation. Because of how it was influenced by the Vietnamese indigenous cult of the Mother Goddess. One of the strongest forms of religious expression in Vietnam has been a deep devotion to the Mother Goddess. Some practices which express devotion to Mary in the Vietnamese church, like chanting, procession, dancing, and tossing flowers, had been practiced in the cult of Mother Goddess for many centuries, long before the Christianity's arrival in Vietnam. So the issues of ancestor worship for converted Christians was not so until 1939, when Pope Pius XII promulgated a guideline that allowed Vietnamese and Chinese Catholics to perform ancestral rites as cultural expressions of filial piety. In the contemporary church, ancestor veneration remains a problem that many Christians do not clearly understand the church's position. Thus, Vietnamese bishops offer guidelines on ancestor veneration to explain that at the wedding, funerals, and death anniversaries, using the rituals and prayers for ancestors are permitted. Vietnamese theologian Peter Phan describes inculturation as an encounter between the culture of the gospel, missionaries' cultures, and other cultures that must abide by the laws of intercultural dialogue. This is particularly relevant for the development of Catholic practice in Vietnam, amid the religious diversities and cultural influences that were present with the introductions of Catholicism by European missionaries. Vietnam has a diversity of religions, and this affects the faith and culture of Vietnamese people. The interaction between faith and culture remains apparent in the lives of the church. Returning to Marian devotion, the Buddhist worship of the Mother Goddess existed well before the Vietnamese received the good news from Western missionaries. The missionaries' introduction of the image of Mary to Vietnamese people were received easily because they found in Mary's virtues many of the same points that were attributed to Mother Goddess. Clearly, the culture of worship of the Mother Goddess was a good soil in which to sow the seeds of love and reverence to Mary, the Mother of God in the church in Vietnam. The Vietnamese Catholic image of God has evolved to three factors of culture, indigenous religions, and Catholic teaching. In Vietnamese culture, the father remains a figure of authority in family decision-making. Thus, God is the powerful one who deserves to be respected, honored, and obeyed. Drawing from Luke chapter 2, verse 7, and Matthew chapter 1, verse 25, Jesus is portrayed as the firstborn son and eldest brother. Likewise, from Romans chapter 8, verse 29, affirm that he was predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. In Vietnamese culture, the eldest brother often have present often have parents to oversee other siblings. Theologically, Jesus expressed his filial piety to God the Father by obeying God to incarnate and sacrifice himself for the salvation of his brothers and sisters. Jesus also is the ancestor for his death and resurrection. According to Peter Fan, Jesus is no longer dead, but is alive among his brothers and sisters, that as parents, though dead, are present among their children. The image of God for Vietnamese Catholics is also influenced by indigenous religious terminology. Alexandros, a 17th century Jesuit missionary, made use of the term and their associated meanings for God and heavens. This allowed Vietnamese Catholics to develop an understanding or image of God that were relatable and culturally relevant in their religiously plural society. These images and terms has also been integrated into the institutional church and thus influenced priests and religious sisters. So, as mentioned, filial piety is a core aspect of Vietnamese culture. Thus, for consecrated women, such as the lover of the Holy Cross sister, they must still observe these rituals even when they leave the blood family to join the congregation. For instance, when parents pass away, the sister will go home for a week to be with family during the time of the funeral and for the death anniversary. Additionally, the congregation will send the sisters to help the families and attend the funeral mass because they consider the parent of the sister is also their parents also. In November week, the church reserved to remember souls. The sisters are sent home to visit and pray at the graves of their ancestors. Filial piety is not only expressed in the blood families, but in the rituals offered to the founder of the congregation. So here you can see from the picture, our sister, we have celebrate the death of our founders. So this event, remember the day he passed away, includes offering incense, flower, we have music, prayer, and study of his spiritual life, and reflecting on the heritage to mirror and imitate. Filial piety of the religious sister, especially for the love of the Holy Cross, is expressed for the sister who passed away to the diocese bishop and other priests who help and guide the sister's spiritual life. So the influence of indigenous spiritualities as well as Confucian and Buddhist practice on the faith life of the Sister of the Lover of the Holy Cross reflects the influence across the broader Vietnamese Catholic Church. Although Catholicism began to grow through the efforts of European missionaries in the 17th century, it truly began to have success when the process of inculturation allowed for aspects like ancestor veneration, celebration of the Lunar New Year, and other aspects of Confucian-influenced Vietnamese culture to become part of Catholic tradition. These ingrained characteristics of Vietnamese Catholicism remain evident in how the love of the Holy Cross sisters live out their charism, serving God and others, whether they are Catholic or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sister. I think the panelists will prefer to have the questions taken right after the talk, and then we can go on. So, sister can take some questions. So, if you have a question,
I think mine is really maybe an insight I'm thinking needs to be explored. I think the insight begins with the question, why do we venerate ancestors? it is simply because, and why do we venerate saints? It's still the same thing. They are exemplars of the moral life. They teach us how to be authentically ourselves, to embody abundant life in the world. And so if that is said, then veneration of anyone is trans-religion. It's it's a means by which we can instantiate interreligious encounters instead of this our exclusivist ideology of saints, of our traditions. To say that yes, for the Vietnamese people, what it means to be a Vietnamese can also be found in the ancestral pathway of the Vietnamese and also through the Christian pathway. So it's not either or, it's both and. I don't know whether theologically, how in your research that plays a role in your theological pursuit. Because it doesn't end only in the cultural discourse. It must be grounded in the ethical vision. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, that is the problem for the Western missionary. They understand it from the beginning. That is the problem. So from that, as I mentioned in my presentation, the Pope Pius XII, he have letter to allow us, to guide us, to see when we venerate the ancestors, like we venerate the saints. So that's the problem was solved at that time. Yeah. So from the beginning, the Western missionary, they misunderstand it. So they ban the convert Vietnamese people who convert to the Christian. So they cannot venerate the ancestor. So they cannot put the ancestor altar in the house. Yeah. So that is a problem. So now we try to guide the people to understand that in the way you say.
Okay, Professor Osaye has a question.
Thank you. I'm not a professor, but I'll take the honor. Okay, Sister, but thank you for your presentation because you are always thinking in parallel ways. And for us, in the Israelite Christian tradition, being in Africa, the ancestors is very critical because if you are cut off your ancestors, you don't have any roots. That's the resistance of a lot of people that when they are told they are not supposed to venerate or worship is too much, but venerate the ancestors because you are cut from your roots. So you become people with no identity, cut from the society. That becomes very traumatic for, I may be exaggerating, but might be traumatic for the society that accepts Christianity but wants to still remain in the community. The way I assess it in our tradition is that the apostles became the ancestors in our culture. So whenever we are discussing, or in the prayers, they says the apostles are ancestors or our fathers. So somehow, instead of cutting yourself, you bring in and incorporate the apostles as the ancestors. In that way, there is some way of a middle way of balance that I would see. But my question is a little bit different than what I'm stating here. I have seen the statue of the heart of Jesus, and so I see a lot of Western statues and icons that are still remaining in the culture in Vietnam, and I see it in many parts of Africa. That's the dilemma because the younger generation want to see themselves. And how do you forge forward, making sure that the icons and the statues are reflecting the people, the indigenous people?
You mean the picture of Mary who carried the
picture of Mary, picture of Jesus, of any saint that is that you can relate. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, we had a Christmas celebration, so our pastor brought from the crib a white baby Jesus. So he was, to venerate, to kiss the baby. He was passing, and people, and a little kid came. I'm not going to kiss a white baby. So this is because we want to relate to an image that looks like that. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, so in Vietnam, we all understand that the Christianity is not its root is not from Vietnam, but it brought from the Western missionary, right? So, for example, for Our Lady of La Vang, that is a picture, special picture, a picture we can say like from the beginning. I don't have time to talk about the story of Our Lady of La Vang who appeared in Vietnam, but from the beginning we use like the Western statues of Mary. So eventually they adapted to let her dress in the Vietnamese clothes, we decorate her. I say that way, like the Vietnamese people, Vietnamese women, to adapt her in Vietnamese culture. So that is the way for Vietnamese people, easy to feel that she is the Vietnamese people, accompany them in the difficulty. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we can have one more. Father Tom has his hand up.
Just a detail on the ancestor veneration. Is it the ancestors of the husband or the wife? And how far back are the ancestors represented? Is it like parents, grandparents, great-grand? How far back does it go? And whose ancestors are?
So in Vietnam, we have idea that anybody in the family who die. So yeah, we have picture. No matter how old you are, yeah, they just put it in the altar whenever whoever died. They have picture and set it in the ancestor altar. Yeah.
Okay, we still have a minute. Jericho, you have a question?
Sister, thank you so much. Just drawing from Sister Nguyen's presentation yesterday, and yours, one question that has been uppermost in my mind is the question of interreligious dialogue. I see tensions in the way Christianity in Vietnam or Catholicism in Vietnam relates with the indigenous or traditional religions, especially with regard to ancestor worship, but also cult of saints and ancestors and all of that. So what's the nature of interreligious dialogue? Because I think that Vatican II has given us like a light for how to approach non-Christian religions, but there seems to be this real tension in Vietnam in the way that these Catholicism looks at and relates with these other religions. Can you offer some kind of insight as to what's really happening in that area?
Yeah, so in Vietnam, of course, we have like the plural religions. So we have every year we have like the annual interreligious dialogue for the Catholic Church. They organize. So in that dialogue, every year they have a theme to talk about how to respect the human dignity, how to promote the people, how to help the poor, how to lead the people to the good life, to the ethical life. So that's what we have in Vietnam. So we try to include all kinds of religions in Vietnam, including like the Buddhism and Taoism, Hoa Hảo. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great paper. Thank you. Could indigenous Indian spiritualities have helped Mother Teresa's spiritual darkness? Father Brian is here to answer that question.
Okay, no microphone. Okay, so I belong to the Missionaries of Charity Fathers, the priest branch of Mother Teresa, and I also served as the postulator for the canonization cause. So that's where this darkness phenomenon came out in 2007 with the book "Come Be My Light," and since this is a Jesuit university, I can say some people were upset. She even said, please destroy all these letters. And so I was giving a presentation, and one lady was very angry and said, why did you do that? Mother Teresa said herself not to destroy these letters. And my first answer was, blame the Jesuits. Because they saved the documents in the Archbishop's house and the provincial archives and Father Nguyen. So, and as soon as they went into the documentation for the canonization, it was only a question of time until they were published. But actually, it's one of our most heroic things. Anyway, that was like Father, like Deo Gracia said yesterday. Now you can start counting the time. So the revelation of Mother Teresa's spiritual darkness surprised some, puzzled others, but remains a key part of her vocation as a 20th century Catholic saint. And this surprising aspect of her relationship with God demonstrated her very strong faith. However, a tendency to avoid suffering has led some to suggest that Mother Teresa should have found a way to escape this darkness. For example, one Hindu scholar has lamented that St. Teresa could have avoided the suffering linked to her spiritual darkness if she had been aware of and embraced a Hindu spiritual practice of meditation. I wish to argue that although Mother Teresa, due to her close ties with Hindus in India, probably knew about these practices, but from a Christian point of view, the spiritual darkness helped her stay committed to Jesus' call and respond to his thirst on the cross. So Mother Teresa became renowned worldwide for her compassionate work among the poorest of the poor. While her daily service was extraordinary, her influence on both the church and the world extended far beyond these activities. God elevated her, making her one of the most recognized figures of the last century due to her remarkable holiness. And this holiness was evident to many individuals, both within and outside the church. Yet its proper depth and nature were not fully understood for many years. More than a quarter century after her death, it is possible to agree with Father Joseph Langford, the co-founder of the MC Fathers, that Mother Teresa's significance reaches beyond her service and example. Quote, Mother Teresa may have been what Answers von Balthasar described in writing of her patron Teresa of Lisieux, a theological existence, a particular word of God to our times, whose holiness and message to the Church go beyond the simple heroic following of a path already trod by others. Her life was her message, and her message was her life, made up in the prophetic tradition of verba et gesta, of word and gestures that are all of a single fabric. Pope John Paul II, in his apostolic letter Novo Millennio Ineunte, January 6, 2001, emphasized that charity, or agape, is essential for the Church. He wrote, love is truly the heart of the Church. And then he further noted that St. Teresa of Lisieux deeply understood this principle, declaring her a doctor of the Church because she was an, quote, expert in the scientia amoris, the science of love. And this science, which the Pope called the lived theology of the saints, complements the Church's science of faith, or academic theology. St. Therese is renowned for her understanding of the science of love. Yet this gift is not limited to her alone. It is granted to the humble and modest, as acknowledged by Pope John Paul II when he declared Therese a doctor of the Church in 1997. Quote, the science of divine love, which the Father of mercies pours out through Jesus Christ in the Holy Spirit, is a gift granted to the little and the humble, so that they may know and proclaim the secrets of the kingdom, hidden from the learned and the wise. For this reason, Jesus rejoiced in the Holy Spirit, praising the Father who graciously willed it so. Mother Church also rejoices in noting that throughout history, the Lord has continued to reveal himself to the little and the humble, enabling his chosen ones through the Spirit, who searches everything, even the depths of God, to speak of the gifts bestowed on us by God, in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truth in spiritual language. Saints, especially the mystics, play an essential role in the life of the Church and its theology. St. Teresa of Calcutta is widely recognized as one of the great saints of the last century. With the publication of her writings in Come Be My Light, Mother Teresa can be seen not only as an expert in the science of love, but also, according to figures such as Father Raniero Cantalamessa, as one of the great mystics of Christianity. Edith Stein, St. Teresa Benedict of the Cross, in her reflection on the hidden life and epiphany, observed that the deeper a soul is bound to God, the more completely surrendered to grace, the stronger will be its influence on the form of the Church. Conversely, the more an era is engulfed in the night of sin and estrangement from God, the more it needs souls united to God. And God does not permit a deficiency. The greatest figures of prophecy and sanctity step forth out of the darkest night. Mother Teresa was such a soul, surrendered without reserve to the Lord in faithful trust, in a profoundly intimate union with Jesus, while her inner life was in the darkest night. So these virtues embodied what Mother Teresa called the spirit of the MC Society, which is in fact the little way of spiritual childhood. In the vocabulary of St. Therese, this meant confidence and abandonment. For Mother Teresa, it was loving trust and total surrender. Always practical, Mother Teresa added cheerfulness as the outward sign of living in trust and surrender. Her holiness was marked by complete surrender to God in loving trust and a constant intention to do His will consistently and entirely. In 1942, she made a vow to God, binding herself under pain of mortal sin, to give God anything He might ask and never to refuse Him anything. Perhaps what was most unexpected was that God asked Mother Teresa to live for nearly 50 years in what she termed the darkness. And this profound experience became a defining aspect of her spiritual journey and her legacy of faith. One of the most remarkable and heroic aspects of Mother Teresa's spiritual darkness is that only a few of her trusted confessors and spiritual directors knew about it. Even her closest companions, including the original group of 12 sisters, were completely unaware of the deep inner struggle she faced. It was only after the documents collected during her canonization process became public that her fellow sisters and the world at large learned of the suffering she had endured for decades. At the core of Mother Teresa's response to Jesus' call was her understanding of His thirst on the cross. This cry of thirst served as a lens through which all aspects of her life and vocation were reflected. It became the unifying thread of her calling, religious charism, or spirituality and mission. The depth of Jesus' longing deeply moved her heart, which was entirely in love with Him. From the cross, Jesus cried, "I thirst." From the beginning of her new mission, Mother Teresa understood this intense and painful thirst as Jesus' longing for love and the salvation of souls. She aimed to quench or satiate Jesus' thirst for love through her passionate love for Him, seeking to return love for love as His spouse, in line with her understanding of female religious consecration. She also aimed to satiate Jesus' thirst for souls by, quote, laboring at the salvation and sanctification of the poorest of the poor. In this way, Mother Teresa aligned her mission with Christ's longing, her thirst, John 19:28, and with her means of fulfilling it. You did it to me, Matthew 25:40. As Pope St. John Paul II noted at her beatification, the cry of Jesus on the cross, expressing God's deep longing for humanity, touched Mother Teresa's soul and became the main force that inspired her to serve the poorest of the poor around the world. If there is a single phrase that defines Mother Teresa, it is that she was a woman passionately in love with Jesus. From childhood, Jesus was her first and only love. In her 1946 letter to Archbishop Perrier, Jesuit, about her inspiration experience of 10 September 1946, she expressed her resolve, following her patroness, St. Therese, to love Jesus as He had never been loved before. Her private writings, later published in Come Be My Light, reveal both Mother Teresa's passionate love for Jesus and the profound interior suffering that this love entailed. Susan Pritchford, in her book God in the Dark, notes that the word passion has both positive and negative meanings. It can refer to strong desire and suffering. Mother Teresa, like the mystics of old, understood that love could not exist without this dual aspect of passion. She could not imagine or live her calling to love without both joy and suffering. The passionate longing of Jesus was expressed through his passion and death, and as his spouse, she shared in both the joy and pain of this love. Mother Teresa understood and practiced loving God in the midst of suffering. By August 1948, as she prepared for her work in Calcutta, she wrote in her medical notebook, "O Jesus, only love of my heart, I wish to suffer what I suffer, and all thou wilt have me suffer, for the pure love, not for the reward thou hast promised me, but only to please thee, to praise thee, to bless thee as well in sorrow as in joy." This acceptance of suffering was the fruit of years of spiritual growth. As early as 1937, at her final profession as a Loreto sister, she wrote to her former parish priest, Jesuit Father Jambrekovich, that she now embraced suffering rather than feared it, describing her life with Jesus as one lived in love. Quote, "Do not think that my spiritual life is strewn with roses. That is the flower which I hardly ever find on my way. Quite the contrary, I have more often as my companion darkness. And when the night becomes very thick and it seems to me as if I will end up in hell, then I simply offer myself to Jesus. If he wants me to go there, I am ready, but only under the condition that it really makes him happy. I need much grace, much of Christ's strength to persevere in trust, in that blind love which leads only to Jesus crucified. But I am happy, yes, happier than ever, and I would not wish at any price to give up my sufferings. But do not, however, think that I am only suffering. Ah, no, I am laughing more than I am suffering, so that some have concluded that I am Jesus' spoiled bride who lives with Jesus in Nazareth, far away from Calvary. Pray much for me. I really need his love." So Mother Teresa was fully aware that answering the call to quench Jesus' thirst would come at a great cost, both for herself and her sisters. She urged them to look to the cross, where Jesus' love is demonstrated through suffering, reminding them that being united with him also means sharing in his sorrows. Sister Nirmala, Mother Teresa's successor as Superior General, observed that Mother Teresa was no longer afraid of suffering. She had learned to endure suffering out of love and maintain joy even in pain, refusing to let others focus on her suffering and instead shifting attention to the poor, the work, or the well-being of others, always saying, "All for Jesus through Mary." More than just a phrase, "all for Jesus through Mary" embodied Mother Teresa's complete self-gift. She never complained about pain or hardships, always accepting suffering quietly or with a cheerful demeanor. A close lay collaborator observed that she had never seen anyone give so fully out of love for Jesus, enduring pain without complaint and consistently smiling. Sister Andrea, another close companion, recalled that Mother Teresa's constant theme was, "all for Jesus." When facing trials, she would say, "This is the chance for greater love," and kept this as a motto for her life. The main point about Mother Teresa's darkness is her profound, joyful, and unwavering love for God, which she radiated even as her internal suffering remained hidden. To those who knew her, she always seemed smiling, joyful, and humorous. The reality of her spiritual darkness was only revealed through her letters to the Archbishop of Calcutta, Archbishop Perrier, and her spiritual directors. This darkness was characterized by a vivid sense of the apparent absence of Jesus, quote, "a terrible sense of loss," leading to intense loneliness and a sharp, persistent pain of longing for the union with Jesus she had once known. She wrote about this to Father Neuner, Jesuit in Pune, and Archbishop Perrier, describing her soul's contradiction, a deep yearning for God mixed with feelings of being unwanted, empty, and faithless. Yet she was committed to keep, quote, "smiling at him in spite of everything." Guided by her spiritual directors, Mother Teresa gradually realized that her painful inner experiences were an essential part of her mission. Her suffering mirrored participation in the Passion of Christ, especially in sharing Jesus' thirst for love and souls. She acknowledged her suffering as Christ's passion imprinted on her soul, as she described in her spiritual dialogues of 1946-47. So speaking to Jesus, or Jesus speaking to her, "You will suffer, and you suffer now. But if you are my own little spouse, the spouse of the crucified Jesus, you will have to bear these torments on your heart." Through this, she experienced the mystery of Calvary alongside the poor. The more she was united with Jesus, the more she felt a constant inner longing and thirst. Her letters and the testimony of her confessors show that she went through spiritual dryness and darkness for nearly 50 years as a missionary of charity. Mother Teresa's hope was tested in a way that mirrored the trials of the poorest of the poor, and Jesus' own cry on the cross, my God, why have you abandoned me? And I thirst." Despite everything, Mother Teresa stayed committed to trusting God and surrendering to his will. Quote, "For sometimes the agony of desolation is so great, and at the same time the longing for the absent one so deep, that the only prayer which I can still say is, Sacred Heart of Jesus, I trust in you. I will satiate your thirst for souls." She described herself as having the joy of having nothing, not even the reality of the presence of God. In her letters, Mother Teresa compared her suffering to the pain of hell, not as physical agony, but as the feeling of being separated from God, surrounded by darkness, unable to lift her soul to him, and longing to believe the words she spoke of love for souls and for God. Amidst this suffering, she offered herself completely to Jesus, willing to be separated from him for all eternity if it meant others could find him and he could take joy in them. Quote, "If my separation from you brings others to you, and in their love and company you find joy and pleasure, why, Jesus, I am willing with all my heart to suffer all that I suffer, not only now, but for all eternity, if this was possible. Your happiness is all that I want." All throughout this trial of the darkness, she longed to believe the words she spoke of love for souls and for God. In October 1961, she resolved to smile at God regardless of how intense the pain or darkness became. Quote, "The greater the pain and darker the darkness, the sweeter will be my smile at God." She began to see the darkness as sharing in Jesus' suffering on earth, and this understanding brought her deep joy and surrender. Quote, "More than ever, I surrender myself to him. Yes, more than ever, I will be at his disposal." In another letter, she clarified that she was not alone in her darkness. Instead, she was sharing in Jesus' own darkness and pain, experiencing, quote, "the terrible longing for God, to love and not to be loved." She knew she was united with Jesus in her will, even if her feelings disagreed. A particularly beautiful expression of Mother Teresa's understanding of her experience, permeated with deep faith and love, is found in one of her later letters from the 1980s. "My love for Jesus keeps growing more simple and more, I think, personal. I want him to be at ease with me, not to mind my feelings, as long as he feels all right, not to mind even the darkness that surrounds him in me, but that in spite of everything, Jesus is all to me, and that I love no one but only Jesus." Mother Teresa even predicted her mission would continue after her death. "If I ever become a saint, I will surely be one of darkness. I will continually be absent from heaven to light the light of those in darkness on earth." So understanding and embracing her spiritual darkness in this way explains why Mother Teresa chose not to escape from it. Instead, it was a vital part of her calling, and to me, the single most heroic aspect of her holiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have a question. Guri?
Mine is not a question, it is a comment. In a world pulling in different directions, when the dignity of the marginalized persons is in jeopardy, I think we need more men and women who embrace the lived theology of Saint Teresa. So thanks so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I spent 2 months with the Mother Teresa's sisters in Addis.
Ah.
You are doing a good job. Keep up the spirit.
A beautiful presentation. I'm asking myself, wow, this is awesome. Spiritual theology, mystical theology, in everything being done here. And you brought in mystical theology. The beauty of the light of Christ can never be experienced unless the darker the night. I think that's what you are saying. That it has to be very dark for the light to be very bright. Yeah. Now, that said, I am particularly curious where psychoanalysts, what their take is on this, what you presented, because some of them will literally say this is grave depression. That is
Yes, that was a question, and as a matter of fact, before the book came out, I asked a psychologist about this, and then also there's a book by Thomas Dubay, and he's talking about the Gospels and John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, and on one of the pages he has a chart. On the left is depression, and on the right is the experience of this kind of darkness. And so, if she kind of wanted to stay in bed and didn't want to get up and be active, well, then you say, well, I guess she was depressed. But one of the things is that, every day at 4:40, that's when they get up, and until late at night, and even, sometimes they had general council meetings after night prayer, because that was the only time that she was free. Or she'd be writing letters to past midnight, and then finally when she just couldn't stay awake anymore. So she was so fully given, and, there was no... But that was one of the questions that was common when the book came out.
I have a follow-up question. What personality type was she?
Oh, choleric. She was strong.
No, not that. I mean, I'm asking more of the Myers-Briggs personality type.
Oh, I don't know. She never took that one. Huh?
No, I think it can.
No, that would be a good question, but I don't know them. I mean, I took Myers-Briggs 2-3 times in my life, but wouldn't be able to say what it is.
I will go check.
That was an interesting question, though.
Yeah, you alluded a little bit to this question that I'm going to ask. I don't know how far she integrated indigenous spirituality into her own spirituality, and if it could have resolved some of these dark nights that she was experiencing.
Yeah, I don't think so much, because remember she was formed pre-Vatican II, and the Loretto sisters were Jesuit inspired, but they were never officially, and they were very European in those days. I mean, it's not a nice thing to say, but there were the Loretto sisters, and they wouldn't allow Indians to enter. And so they had the Daughters of St. Anne, which Mother Teresa was in charge of for some years. And so now it's different. Now there's Indian sisters in Loretto. But at that time, that was kind of a sign of the time. So, yeah, I mean, on one hand, she was very Indian. She was totally enculturated. She had the Indian mentality down to a T. So you could have, if you didn't see white skin, you could have said she was Indian. She was really understood very well. One time one of our priests who was there in Calcutta said, well, no, make sure you go to that office because they like to see the one who's at the head, so don't send a representative. So it's a small little thing. But she really, and she loved India and wanted to die in Calcutta, which she did. So she was fully Indian. And I think that's also how the church was there at the time. They weren't, now it's different, but we're getting different.
Okay, Father Tom?
Excuse me, yeah, thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear about her and about that struggle with darkness. If I could connect it to the spiritual exercises in the third week, Passion of Christ, it is considered consolation to be drawn into the Passion of Christ in that kind of way, in which the longing for God is there, but the sense of the absence at the same time. It's that combination of so it's not darkness in the way most of us would understand it immediately. It's a darkness of desire and of longing. And that, in the Ignatian framework, would be a consolation.
Yeah.
Not of the second week, not of the fourth week. But.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Loretta was very much Jesuit inspired, and all her formation, as Loretta was Jesuit, Archbishop was Jesuit, Father Van Exen was Jesuit, and Father Neuner was also Jesuit, and I think Father Neuner, who is the one who is Austrian, but he was in Pune, and he helped her the most. And that was one of the things he was saying. Even that it's a form of prayer, even this longing, desire, doesn't make much easy. I mean, the pain is the pain, but that's why Father Neuner, that was I quoted from her response to Father Neuner writing. It's the spiritual side of your work, and so that was like turn on the light, and that's it. Now I surrender myself even more. So that was she was helped most of all by, and they would Father Neuner, Father Picacci was later Cardinal Picacci of Calcutta, would give her the spiritual exercises. So she had strong Jesuit influence. Besides Teresa on one side, the other side is the Ignatian influence.
Okay, we have time for one more question or reaction if there is. Otherwise, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, the next panelist, Dr. Joe Evans, is going to present a paper on the impact of Marian spirituality in the implementation of Catholic social teaching for religious sisters in South Asia. Welcome, Joe.
All right, good morning. So as he said, I'm Joe Evans. I am a visiting fellow at the Center for Peace and Justice at Villanova University, and also the research fellow at the Mother Teresa Institute, working for Father Brian in Washington, D.C. And I will talk about the impact of Marian spirituality on how Catholic social teaching is implemented by religious sisters in South Asia. In Velankini, a small fishing village in the southern tip of India, Mary appeared to two Hindu boys in the late 16th century. The shrine, built to Our Lady of Good Health there, has since become one of the most popular religious pilgrimage sites in the world, attracting more than 7 million devotees each year. For Catholics in India and across the subcontinent, the image of Mary in a golden sari, holding the Christ child, is widely recognizable and highly revered among Christians and non-Christians alike. Devotion to Mary at this shrine is often tinged with Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, and other indigenous influences that have shaped Catholicity in the South Asian subcontinent for centuries. Christianity in South Asia has reportedly existed since the arrival of St. Thomas the Apostle in the 1st century. It spread with the arrival of European missionaries in the 15th century. It remains a small minority. Within the religious plurality of South Asia, where varied religions or regions are dominated by Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and other traditions, the Catholic faith has deliberately engaged in a process of enculturation. Amid this context, numerous congregations of women religious rigorously seek to implement Catholic social teaching for the poor, outcast, and marginalized. These religious sisters often draw from an enculturated Marian devotion that is shared with devotees from across the religious spectrum. My paper argues that the uniquely interreligious nature of Marian devotion in South Asia is a foundational aspect of how Catholic religious sisters seek to promote and preserve the human dignity of all people with solidarity, love, and pursuit of the common good. After examining enculturation amid the religious plurality, I then turned to how Marian devotion has shaped the way Catholic religious sisters in the subcontinent approach the ways that they implement and live out Catholic social teaching. I focus on 3 examples. Again, the Mother Teresa's missionaries of charity and their care for the poor and dying, which we just heard a little bit about. Interreligious peace building, with the Sisters of the Sacred Heart in northern India, and various congregations from across the subcontinent participating in the international network Talitha Kum to fight against human trafficking. Now, each of these examples is somewhat unique, but embody shared traits that are evident in the actions and faith of most congregations in South Asia. So again, just a little more on the history of Catholicism in the region. So in the first century, it's reported that the Apostle Thomas, that's Doubting Thomas, either came across the Arabian Sea or by land through what is now Pakistan and arrived in the southern tip of India to establish the Christian church that has lasted for 2 millennia, as well as in Sri Lanka. In the 15th century, the arrival of the European missionaries helped to establish a Christian foothold in Goa and other parts of India, further up the coast of the Arabian Sea. Then in the 16th centuries, European missionaries arrived in Sri Lanka, and Our Lady of Lavang appeared down in what is the southern tip of India near to Sri Lanka. It was in the 18th and 19th centuries that Jesuit missionaries moved north into Tibet, and Franciscan missionaries established dedicated villages in what is now Pakistan for Christians. It was not until the 20th century, only about 75 years ago, that the Jesuits were invited into Nepal, and Catholicism established a small foothold in Nepal. The religious plurality you can see on the map. So what I put here is sort of a symbol for the dominant religious tradition in each of the countries or regions. Sri Lanka and Tibet, primarily Buddhist. Pakistan in the west, Bangladesh in the east, primarily Muslim. India and Nepal, primarily Hindu. South Asian theologian Michael Amaladas describes enculturation to be an adaptation of the way the church teachings are presented in non-Christian cultures, and in turn the influence of those cultures on the evolution of these teachings. In other words, enculturation means the incarnation of the gospel in local cultures, and at the same time the introduction of these cultures into the life of the church. The Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue stated that the way of fulfilling the church's mission depends on the particular circumstances of each local church, with a sensitivity to the social, cultural, religious, and political aspects of the situation, with attentiveness to the signs of the times which the Spirit of God is speaking, teaching, and guiding. This is developed through a spirituality of dialogue with a prayerful discernment and theological reflection on the significance in God's plan on the different religious traditions and the experiences of those who find them in them spiritual nourishment. We see this in examples of enculturation across South Asia. In the practices, specifically referring to Marian shrines, we see this in the tonsuring of hair for penance, which is primarily a Hindu practice, or originally a Hindu practice, the offering of fruits and coconuts. In images, I'll talk a little bit more about the enculturation of Mary, and in spirituality. So I'll describe a little more about Sister Vandana Mataji and her ashram in northern India in the Himalaya, but also among scholars like Raymond Panikar, or in the well-known Benedictine monks André Lassault and Bede Griffiths with their ashrams in India. The women religious in the congregations, having grown up in this religiously plural environment and enculturated church, also tend to exhibit these traits that are often specific to Catholic rituals and traditions in the local church. In the case of the three examples that I'll give with the Missionaries of Charity, as Father Brian mentioned, she was 100% Catholic, right? There was not a blending, but her sister, she's exposed to the Hindu culture, surrounded by Hindus, Muslims, and others. And her sisters that joined her congregation came from this environment of religious plurality. With the Sisters of the Society of the Sacred Heart, it was interreligious peace building through enculturation to build bridges, and with the Talitha Kum network with anti-human trafficking work. So I want to first cover what is it that I'm talking about with Catholic social teaching very briefly. The 7 principles of Catholic social teaching here are shown in this diagram on the left. At the center is human dignity. Now, all the other leaves on this flower of Catholic social teaching are founded on the primary principle of human dignity. Magisterial teaching of the Church on Catholic social teaching draws from, or on human dignity, draws from two primary sources. One is Genesis, that we're created in the image and likeness of God. And this leads to our intrinsic or ontological dignity that applies to every human being, can never be lost. The second source is human rights. Catholic social teaching, especially since 1948, references the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the message has remained consistent since Rerum Novarum by Leo XIII in the late 19th century. And from this is where we get the moral, social, and existential dignity that we have to fight for and defend and protect. Most women's religious congregations, including the three I mentioned, have activities that intend to implement Catholic social teaching, either through their charism, as in the Missionaries of Charity, although Mother Teresa simply drew from Jesus' method rather than papal encyclicals, or through the Justice and Peace offices or individual leaders such as Vandana Mataji, who I will talk about, and their interpretation of Nostra Aetate and Enculturation, other Vatican II documents, or through the participation of larger organizations such as Talitha Kum. Mary's relationship to Catholic social teaching can be looked at in each of these areas as well. With human dignity, she's a model of strength, a source of comfort, especially for the most vulnerable, a preferential option for the poor. You can find this in her words in the Magnificat, lift up the lowly, send the rich away empty, and promoting peace, her words in Fatima or Medjugorje, or named as Our Lady Queen of Peace. She's a source of reconciliation and nonviolence at the foot of the cross, and explicitly described in promoting peace by Pope Paul VI in Mense Mayo in 1965. And solidarity with the visitation with her cousin Elizabeth at the wedding at Cana, where she is thoughtful and observing and caring for others. And through Our Lady of Sorrows, where Mary embraces the pain and suffering in life to give her son to the world, similar to how many women in South Asia suffer today. And Mary's image and presence here, this picture on the right, is from a church in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Her presence and importance in South Asia and the process of enculturation has helped to make her relevant to non-Christian contexts as well. Her appearance in local dress is an example that helps make her familiar and relatable to all South Asians, not just Catholics. The form of a healing mother is distinct and familiar to people of all faiths. The mother of Jesus is one whom both Muslims and Hindus venerate, who appears in the Quran as Miriam, and who is prayed to or worshipped, as Hindus would say, in dozens of churches and shrines all over India. Other examples is the way she's presented. I don't have the picture of it here, but in Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, other places, Mary is very rarely seen standing on a snake, because this doesn't quite translate to Buddhist or Hindu converts who view snakes in a different way. Or she's often appeared standing on a lotus, as like many Hindu goddesses are portrayed. As I mentioned, the local dress, wearing the sari, native facial features with darker hair, dark eyes. The grotto at the main Catholic church in Kathmandu, Nepal, uses parts from old Hindu and Buddhist temples. As the water spouts, the designs to help construct the grotto. These features help make Mary relatable to South Asian Catholics, as well as non-Catholics who are drawn to her shrines and image. So then moving in, how do these three different congregations that I talked about, how does the Marian devotion shape what they do in this enculturated Marian devotion? And I'm going to start with the Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and specifically focus on one of their superiors, Vandana Mataji. Now the Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus were focused on education. That was their main role. But through this, they channeled that into a peace-building effort in the interreligious nature of India. And Mataji was a nun who headed the Christian ashram, Jivadhara, in the foothills of the Himalaya. Her main objective as a teacher was to promote an integration of Hinduism into Christian spirituality. She regularly spent 6 months of the year in the Himalaya, for her spiritual exercises and emphasized the role of japa yoga as a spiritual bridge between Hinduism and Christianity. She presented Marian theology and spirituality as an Indian woman sees the mother of Jesus and women in her own country. She describes Catholic and Muslim veneration of Mary and how Hindus worship her as a mother. A recurring theme is how Mary is relevant to bridge builders and peacemakers. Sister Vandana invites Christians, through the inspiration of Mary, to play a more active role in resolving religious and communal tensions, a peace based on equality and justice, and a harmony based on interreligious dialogue. Another source for her was the silence of the Pieta. Mary, the forlorn yet strong mother, strong in the strength of her utterly selfless mother love, who held the dead body of her son in her arms, the way so many women all over the world do. Mataji also said that those who believe in Mary's heart, whether they be Christians or not, have a very definitive role to play as reconciliators, peacemakers, and bridge builders. She says that Mary should be of interest to all who are eager to be bridge builders and peacemakers, bringing unity and harmony in a war-torn world, especially South Asia. Then moving to the missionaries of charity, as Father Brian talked to us about, Mother Teresa made the promise to never reject Jesus, to never deny God, and through this seeing Jesus in the poor. Everything for Jesus through Mary, and doing all these things with love, and expressing that love with joy. And it is the Immaculate Heart of Mary that is the cause of their joy. One interesting note, about 60% of the sisters in the Missionaries of Charity still come from India. Previously, most of them came from the south, now more from the northeastern tribal areas. But either way, they're coming from, again, a religiously plural environment, growing up in this enculturated church, with influence from Hindu, Muslim, and Buddhist neighbors and society. And then there's the interreligious aspects of their work, and the interreligious nature of the Marian devotion in the subcontinent, which go together. Mother Teresa sought to build peace through love and compassion. Her joy and love of God expressed in a desire to offer peace to the most marginalized and suffering were attributes of her devotion to Mary. She was described by Catholics, Hindus, and others as becoming the embodiment of Mary, with Mary as the spiritual atmosphere in which she lived, worked, and loved. Even the Dalai Lama, while relying on traditional Buddhist concepts of peace, reached across religious boundaries to correlate peace with selflessness, frequently citing the Missionaries of Charity. For instance, he described Mother Teresa as a model of altruism who exhibits the centrality of the compassionate ideal in Christianity. The Missionaries of Charity peace-building efforts to prevent suffering not only strengthen relationships and promote unity, but exhibit the principles of Catholic social teaching and her attention to the poor and vulnerable, all through Mary, the Mother of all. The third example is the Talitha Kum network and their anti-human trafficking efforts. And here I relied specifically on, or mainly on some input from a few of the sisters that established Talitha Kum in Sri Lanka, but also drawing from the organizations across the rest of the countries in the region. And they are intent to grow collaboration with interfaith partners for justice and human dignity. Their mission to uphold human dignity and challenge the systems. And when it comes to trafficking, especially in South Asia, mostly women are the victims. So when they go through this suffering and are subjected to trafficking, they're also subjected to exploitation and violence, violating their inherent sacred human dignity. According to Sister Nalanthi Ranasinghe, who is the driving force for establishing Talitha Kum Sri Lanka, our Blessed Mother's virtues, womanhood, a real model for all women, was a tough virtue of good qualities any woman should inherit. She is a model for them as a mother, a sister, and a close companion. Mary, who underwent a lot of suffering, given her motherhood to the whole world for the sake of her son, did not criticize or complain, but endured. And the sisters involved in the anti-human trafficking work see the same thing from many of the women, often forced to suffer in silence, just like Mary. And they draw from St. Paquita, who never gave up, followed the same path as our Blessed Mother. Mary never gave up. No matter the suffering, persevered in faith, and many young girls in Sri Lanka, India, other parts of the region need that power of resilience that can come from Mary. Sister Nalanthe says, Mary is a treasure for us. Even for non-Catholics are going to Mother Mary and are inspired, strengthened, and guided for their own suffering and pain. So these examples, which I think are indicative of the countless other religious sisters and congregations throughout South Asia, show a few things. First, Marian devotion among South Asian Catholics is influenced by an enculturated understanding of Mary and the faith. The process of enculturation is clearly influenced by the different indigenous spiritualities from Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, and other religious practices. Religious sisters from South Asia and their congregations exhibit these same traits from being formed in these communities. Third, the Marian spirituality in its various forms and interpretations is often a force behind the work that these sisters do to live, practice, and implement Catholic social teaching. Marian devotion is not the reason why they do it, but it shapes it. Often, the recognition that they must work alongside with and through their non-Christian partners means that the enculturated Marian devotion is a strength and a relatable aspect of their work they do to promote human dignity, a preferential option for the poor, and build peace in a region that faces significant threats from poverty, human trafficking, and ethnic, religious, and political conflict. It is often the local, regional images of Mary that are invoked as the most powerful. Religious sisters in Sri Lanka tend to point towards Our Lady of Madhu and its attraction to Buddhists, Hindus, and others as a source of bridge building and peacemaking in the post-conflict country. Religious sisters in India frequently invoke Our Lady of Good Health in Villanova for her intercession on behalf of all, no matter which faith. Mother Teresa was less specific, but when seeking a ceasefire to rescue disabled children from a hospital, which miraculously occurred as soon as she lit a candle to the Blessed Mother, she stated that she simply asked Our Lady for the bombs to stop, and they did. Enculturation, through the influence of indigenous spirituality, has deeply influenced the Marian spirituality of religious sisters across South Asia, and it shows how effective they are through their implementation of Catholic social teaching and promoting the human dignity of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joe. Now, time for reactions, questions, answers. Yes, Simon.
Joe, I think I love your presentation for many reasons. It reminded me of something in Nigeria when I was a missionary there. One of the greatest testimonies to eradication of patriarchy and violence against women that I noticed was devotion to Mary by men. All the men who had embraced devotion to Mary, families, they had the most healthy marital relationship. I don't know how to explain it, but that was a testimony I could just say there. And I think there is a type of spirituality of justice that Mary evokes in the heart of all, and especially of men in a patriarchal world. I don't know if that's in your research. I know if your research is going towards that. Carmelita Osong, a Filipino theologian, talks about this a lot within the context of the Philippines. But I just wanted to mention that, at least in the context of Africa, Nigeria.
What is the name of the Filipino theologian?
Carmelita Osong, U-S-O-N-G is her last name.
Great. Yeah, no, so that was actually a big part of the focus of my dissertation when I did it, and some of the other projects I'm working on. Is there anything that you've seen or that you know written about what you saw in Nigeria?
No, not really.
No.
Maybe I need to.
So I've seen the same trends in other parts, right? In Pakistan, and among Christians and Muslims, in Nepal certainly too, other places. So I think there's something to that.
They upended, what I noticed about this men, they upended this, even the roles, family roles in the family that were patriarchally constructed. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
He was talking when I left yesterday.
And he's still talking.
My apologies.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. the question I'm going to ask relates to what the same thing about I could have asked it. I could have thrown it to the sisters too. It's the same kind of trend. Like you present Mary as liberative, right? And I share that view. But then a feminist reading has a different take to Mary, and it seems to counter what the observation of that man who talks a lot. So my question then is: Have you engaged some feminists to see to the extent that they disagree with what you are doing, or to the extent that they agree with you?
Yes, so absolutely, but I think it tends to be regional though too. I think a lot of this came from people like Elizabeth Johnson or others, you know, in the early 1980s, mid 1980s, and then some Latin American theologians. I can't remember their name now, but some of the Mujerista theologians who were very disturbed by what they saw as Our Lady of Guadalupe, specifically promoting sort of a machismo culture in Latin America. Now, on the other hand, Asian feminist theologians have sort of gone the other way. People like Chung Hyung Kyung from South Korea, even Kwak Poi Lan, and other Asian feminist theologians. And that's how I actually found Sister Vandana Mataji, who did a sort of a rebuttal of that, saying, no, from our perspective, no, Mary, so we need to reclaim that narrative. So yeah, there is that traditional narrative that tends to reinforce Mary as a passive, obedient to men, right? Not as opposed to sort of that reclaimed narrative from many feminist theologians saying, no, that's not Mary, right? This is Mary of the Magnificat, Mary of the Strength, right? So yes, I have acknowledged those concerns among many feminist theologians, but I see just as many, especially really predominantly Asian feminist theologians, who have not rejected that, but acknowledged it and reclaimed that narrative to promote more of what we're talking about here in Nigeria and in this case.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Pastor Yael has a question.
Yeah, I'll be next to Simon in terms of.
You begin.
Okay, my observation is that two things. Number one, I see from Our Lady of Guadalupe all the way to Vietnam, I see the almost Mary becomes what do you call a subversion, challenging the status quo of the patriarchal or approach to evangelization. That's one aspect that I can, because the similarity is so clear across the board. The second one is, as we preach monastic religion, there is a gap for the female aspect of the divinity. And Mary seems to fill in that void that the patriarchal approach to God has, and becomes a very uniform way of somehow filling the gap across the continents. My question is, also this fits in the Magnificat that he said that the mighty will be overturned. But my question to you is in terms of how the women are seen less, less challenging, whether in to the male domain, political and what have you, and how do you see this? Because at the end of the day, if they are sinner peacemakers, but they are still subservient to the status quo, how do they overcome this subservient approach? Because at the end of the day, it is their children who are the victims, whether they are male or female. how can they be more assertive and be able to go beyond? Because at the end of the day, whoever signs a political treaty is a male group who may not have that deeper sympathy and understanding what a woman is.
So I'll first say that the majority of the pilgrims that come to the Marian shrines, especially in South Asia, but really all across the world, are women. The majority of the devotees there. But I'm going to step away from the shrines. I think the shrines can play a role in promoting harmony in interfaith religion, building bridges, promoting unity, as we talked about, right? But as far as women's role in peacemaking, so I'm going to step away from this paper. I think it's a separate topic, but it's something that is important to me. As somebody who has worked as a peace builder, has worked I'm a retired Army officer, right? So I've been in wars and different places. I've seen the effects of war on women and the role that women play in promoting peace. It's different everywhere, but there's so many different ways that it can be done. In Sri Lanka, it tended to be women's movements. As their sons were taken away by security forces or other thing. There was that cultural respect for mothers and for women. There was the patriarchal aspect of it, but there was still that respect for them in their role as mothers that allowed them almost an impunity to be able to go out and challenge security forces, to challenge the political regimes and the culture of taking that. Women were the ones that could, when they grouped together, became a very powerful voice. Same thing in the tribal areas of northeast India, where there's been an ongoing rebellion for the last several decades. It's mothers groups and it's female students that have stood up and really become the most active peace builders in their communities because of their role in the communities, which became enhanced as many of the men left to go join either the military or as insurgent fighters. The women were left in charge, and they took that and ran with it, and they really became a force for peace. Where the challenge, though, still, as you rightly mentioned, is at those high-level official peace dialogues, where the generals, the senior politicians, tend to be predominantly men. And getting women to have a voice in that is a challenge that still needs to be overcome.
Okay. We will take, we save some time so we can hear Joseph before we move on.
Yeah, I was a pastor in Nigeria for 7 years, and I worked in the rural area. My experience agrees with what Simon experienced. And what I want to say is that Marian devotion has a spirituality that restores family value across the board. Let me explain what I mean. By family value, from my own experience, which we encourage, it made men, even though from dominant patriarchal culture, they behave in a different way to their wives. And whether it is interpreted negatively about Mary, what happens in the family dynamics is that those women, they show more love. At the face value, you may interpret the love they show as being submissive, but it is not. That rubs off on their husbands. And Christian families that are deep into Marian devotion, you see them, they are free from other social ills. Those husbands hardly hang out with other men who drink and all that. And the reason why we encouraged Marian devotion, I did, and I saw the fruit, is that those men in the eyes of others may appear to be weak. The impression may be that their wives control them. But at the end of the day, only one thing is the key. There is peace in the family. There is love. Their children are different from the rest of other children. I do not have an academic paper or authors to back this up, but I am sharing my 7 years experience of working in the countryside, among the poor, among rural farmers. Marian devotion is the key. And for me, this will be a stepping stone to actually redefining what feminist theology should be. Is it the same for those in the urban? Is it the same for those in the rural? That's just my own country.
Thank you. We don't have time for more questions, but we have time for one comment here.
Can I make one comment?
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to go?
I just want to respond to him and then add one more thing to what Cyril said. Yes, and I think that trend is everywhere, right? And one specific place I want to mention is in the current conflict in Ukraine, Russia. And this is for those from the University of Dayton. We will be, there was a book that we just did on Marian Reflections on War and Peace, which has a couple chapters which address those feminist theology viewpoints and some of the conflict and women and peace building aspects of it, and the family values, often at the level of individual soldiers, combatants on both the Russian, Ukrainian side, Orthodox, Catholic, Muslim perspectives. But we will be at the University of Dayton on November 3rd to do a book release for that and talk a little more about it if you're able to stop by.
Okay, sorry. This man is insisting. Please, can you just do it quickly?
In 2023, President Kagame made comments about people going, especially women, going to Our Lady, to the shrine of Our Lady of Kibeho, which is a local shrine, and tried to make comments that this kind of pilgrimages is perpetuating kind of poverty, and even threatened to jail people who are promoting this kind of pilgrimages. Do you think there's connection between poverty and these Marian devotions?
No.
At least I did not see that in Nigeria.
It's just African.
It's
just African.
He just wants to control.
He wants to control.
He's just afraid of the crowd.
Yeah, very affluent.
That's
They're afraid of subversion.
Yeah.
In fact, it created more productivity on the part of the men to get to work.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can say more on this other time.
Yeah. So on that note, I wanted to just say this. From the talk also, thank you very much, Joe. There is sensitivity that is very important. So Joseph was talking about being pastor. There was this very good preacher, very influential in Nigeria, who was very familiar with the line in Exodus, that these Egyptians you see today, you will see no more. And he was invited to a crusade in Egypt, and he continued in that high spirit. And he says, these Egyptians today, tell your neighbor, these Egyptians you see today, you will see no more. I don't know whether we saw more of him after that. So Kagame also needs to be more sensitive to all those stuff. And then you can't go and talk about merit, stepping on the head of the serpent in such a culture. So I really appreciate the talk. And with this, I think you deserve a break. We'll come back at 10:45.